Everything went really well until about 2,000 miles in. So this year's running of the C2C Express was actually my 9th cross-country drive, and each time you do it, it kind of takes on its own meaning, you know, based on who you drive with, what other cars are there in the field, what car you're driving, and how everything plays out, because there's so many miles between New York and LA, and so many things that can happen, you really never know how it's going to go. And you know, obviously I'd really been looking for the right way to not only celebrate the 5th anniversary of our 2013 New York to LA record, but also kind of redeem the Audi that we've been resurrecting over the last couple of years. And it hadn't made the 2904 last year, so we bought the limousine, but this year it just seemed like the perfect opportunity, and I'd hoped that all the pieces would come together and we'd be able to make the car work. And fortunately, Stephen Krause from Mad Hatter Auto Works had been just working tirelessly over the last few months to finish the engine swap and just get the car ready to go. And he had recommended that we take it to Audubon Performance locally, not far here from VINwiki headquarters, to let them kind of do the last punch list items, go through everything, make sure that the brakes, cooling, suspension, everything was really just under control. And they did at significant but very reasonable expense, and so I'm very thankful to them. And I'm also thankful to Butler Tire, not only for their support of this month's car stories, but also for the last minute alignment to get the car ready to go. And also at the last minute, I was contacted by K40, and they wanted me to test out their latest radar detector and laser jamming system, and they asked if they could donate one for this trip. And they had Cartoons, actually the same company here locally in Atlanta, that did the install for all the electronics and countermeasures on the CL55 that we used in 2013. They installed everything along with our CB and the lights and everything else that we wanted for a proper Cannonball car. And again, I can't thank Off the Record enough for their support of this project and of this channel. I mean, they knew that it mattered to me to get this car back to life and brought across the country on a drive like this, and so they stepped up. And if you happen to ever need their services, which fortunately this week we did not, but they're a great service to help you find a local traffic attorney. And it's a free app to download and something that we all ought to keep handy. So it really came down to the last minute, but we did get the car ready. And at that point, I hadn't really driven it all that much. I mean, I'd probably put 350 to 400 miles on it, which really represented all the miles this car had seen in the last 20 years. Because when the guy that I got it from parked it in the mid-90s, all he said was that it had started to occasionally overheat. And that didn't really seem that surprising given the car, and we'd replaced absolutely everything we could think of, so we assumed that we had dealt with whatever that issue was, even though nothing really stood out as being particularly broken in regards to the cooling system. But again, there wasn't that much testing done, so I met up with a couple of the guys that were headed north to the starting line in New York City, and we made our way up there. And the only thing that was really difficult on the way to New York City was the fuel pump started to get really angry towards the end of a couple driving legs. So as the fuel would get a little bit low, it would just start screaming and clattering and really sounding upset. And I couldn't find a replacement or a spare of that particular Bosch fuel pump, and really didn't want to try to re-engineer something else to make it work. And in talking to the guys back here that had helped us with the project along the way, they said it's unlikely that pump's going to fail. It's probably just grabbing some particulate matter, that even though we cleaned out the tank and everything else in the system, there's still going to be some things in there because it's an old car with old everything. So we got to New York, and you know, for this drive, I knew we were not going to go that fast. It was really much more about just celebrating the 2013 record and just enjoying the drive and kind of soaking in the miles a little bit more than I'd ever been able to, because all the other runs had been kind of at much greater haste. And so I had invited Alex Roy and Arnie Toman along, and that really was going to add to the experience for me. And I knew they were excited about kind of an arrive and drive opportunity, because you know, if I'm going to try to really appreciate what this drive stands for, there's no better people. Obviously, Alex held the record before me at 31 hours 4 minutes, and in addition to telling some amazing stories here, Arnie Toman has also become a real figurehead in this kind of community of outlaws. So I was excited to see them, to spend some real time, just not only in the task of the drive, but really just in conversation and continuing to enjoy the friendships that I have with each of them. And it was great to see everyone, all the old faces, all the new faces, and just everybody who still cares about this idea. So the next morning, we went over to the Red Ball and we set off, and a lot of you saw the live stream that we did for the first hour and an hour in the middle, and our arrival, including a police escort from the local Redondo Beach Police Department, which we can't thank them enough for. But the drive was really good. I mean, obviously the car was not that quick, and that wasn't really the point, but we did get it up to 114 miles an hour on a very long, very straight, very smooth bit of road. And I was told that the car was gear limited at 115, so I was quite pleased with that. And we sustained a decent enough average, nothing impressive, nothing record setting, but a really, really fun way. Fortunately, like I said, we didn't need the off the record app, and we actually didn't need the ticket free guarantee from K40, because the only time we got pulled over, I think Alex was only doing about 78 and a 70, and we had a Scout, one of the VINwiki users that's really active, was out ahead of us a little bit at that point in Missouri. So everything went really, really well until about 2,000 miles in, because the last 800 or 900 miles got a little bit dicey. The car was just hurting really, really bad. It had started to tick really badly from the top end of the motor, and even though it had oil and everything seemed okay, it was just seeming really, really upset with the torture test we were putting it through. And if we would sustain that 90 to 105 mile an hour zone, it would start to have the temperature creep up, and our coolant gauge was only working intermittently, so we had to be kind of constantly sensitive not only to that, but the oil temperature, which was this old 80s terrible gauge. But at the end of the day, we were able to make it in. We just ended up having to stop several times and add 4 or 5 total gallons of coolant to it, because it would just start to get a little hot. Then I think the point of failure that we may not have recognized was in the coolant expansion tank, and so if it got hot and stayed hot, even though it wasn't pegged out, the expansion tank would start leaking and it would just throw coolant everywhere. So we'd have to be sensitive to the smell of coolant and eventually just pull over and put some gas in, get some decent food, and continue along our way. It was a lot to take care of, this car, but really nothing that the three of us couldn't handle, which admittedly none of us are the handiest guys in the world, so I was pleased that it never got too complicated. But we were able to make it, and we did it in 37 hours and 44 minutes, and by no means a record in any regard, but something that I'll always look back on fondly and enjoy. And if there's one thing that we really could take away from Top Gear in its heyday, it was that when you go on an epic drive in an awful car, you love that awful car. And it didn't take anything else to make me really like this car, but this drive really did make me fall in love with it. I mean, it's probably a car I'll hold on to for a long, long time, and I definitely don't like the way it looks, feels, drives, performs, or anything really about it, but there's just something about it, what it stands for, what it meant to the hero that I've had through this Cannonball process, and the chance to use it with these kind of guys for something like this, that really does make it special to me. And it was really an awesome drive. It was not easy, it was very hot. We learned that we just couldn't run the air conditioning really at all, and for about the last 500 miles I think we had the heat on most of the time, because that would keep the motor about 10% cooler when we had it on. So it wasn't pleasant, but it was awesome. And that's really what this is all about. It's about just soaking in the American automotive history that Cannonball is, obviously paying our respects not only to Brock Yates but to Burt Reynolds this year. And there's just so much that this has come to mean for so many of us. You just had this feeling like we've accomplished something, and this car now means a lot more than it did 2,800 miles ago. And so it was awesome to see everybody make it, everybody have a good time, and all these cars, limp their ways across the country, particularly Doug Tabbitt's Monte Carlo, which broke down last year in the 2904, but this year emerged victorious. Not without calamity, mind you. There were plenty of obstacles between New York and LA for them, but they made it in 33 hours and 33 minutes. Just an amazing time. So they got to win the event. I was extremely happy for him, and also I was selfishly a little bit happy that he did not best my 32-hour and 5-minute competitive event New York to LA record that we set back in the 2015 2904. One of the coolest things about this year's run was that we were really able to support 2 awesome charities. Not only the Brock Yates Memorial Fund, which we've usually supported with 2904, but also the Cannonball Memorial Run. And obviously, as Cannonball kind of started with this almost thumb your nose at the cops kind of idea that the 55 mile an hour speed limit imposition was something so offensive that we had to respond by street racing across the country, with what we've done with Cannonball Memorial Run, just trying to bridge that gap between law enforcement and car enthusiasts has been a really, really fun process. And so this event raised a lot of money for both of those organizations, but also Ben, the organizer of the event, did not find that he fell in love with his car over the course of this drive. He'd bought a 1987 Ford Crown Vic LTD, and it had not done well leading up to the event. He had just put a ton of money and a ton of time into making it roadworthy enough to make the event, and fortunately he did make it across. So at the closing ceremony party, he actually announced that he wanted to auction that car off to benefit the Cannonball Memorial Run. So the car is going to be auctioned off, and I'll put a link in the description below. So bid often and bid high, and I hope that whoever gets it ends up using it for some awesome use and make an awesome lemons car or chump car or maybe even a great car for your next drive across the country.